Welcome, everyone. It's 12:30, so we'll get started. I'm Jamie Goodrich, the Director of the Humanities Center, and it is my pleasure to introduce this latest installment in our Walter F. Edwards Brown Bag Colloquium Series. And I just always want to point out, whenever we have our namesake here, welcome, Walter. We're glad to have you here for this. Today we're hearing from Victoria Stewart, who is Assistant Director of the Wayne State University Humanities Center, where she runs the day-to-day operations of the center's Public Humanities Initiative, the Detroit Humanities Hub. Through the hub, she manages the Humanities at Work internship program, the Big Epic Read community reading program, and other public engaged programs and projects. Trained as a folklorist, Victoria has worked for 2 decades as an educator and program organizer and administrator in academic and public settings, connecting scholarly and local communities through programs that unite academic inquiry, student professional development, and community interests and needs. And the title of her talk today is the Public Humanities in Teaching, Research, and Student Professional Development. And I'll let her take it away.
Hey, thank you, Jamie, and thanks everybody for coming, and thanks, Nick, for coming from Michigan Tech. It's good to see you on the internet. Hi, I'm Victoria. I used to be like you, a professor who wanted to get tenure and continue on that track. I'll just give you a little thing. Before I worked here, I was the associate professor of Finnish and Nordic studies at a very small liberal arts college in the Upper Peninsula. We had a little over 300 students when the place closed down in 2023. And we each basically were a department of one. And so it caused, each person who worked there to have to really advocate for their programs, to really wrangle resources, to make things work a lot. Before I was that professor, I also worked at the same institution as a public programming coordinator. And I have my PhD in folklore and Scandinavian studies from University of Wisconsin-Madison. So folklorists, you have at least a 50-50% chance of working in the public sector as opposed to the academic sector. And so mashing up public humanities and academia is nothing that I was a stranger to, and something that I actually found very fun, but also very useful when I'm trying to do work that was beyond the classroom and that could have impact for both tenure and for student development and so forth. So these were things that fed into this work that I wound up doing over the course of the 10 years I was a professor up there. I did have some kind of cool things come out of it. I was the distinguished faculty one year. That was nice. I have a medallion I wear around when I'm feeling bad about myself now. I also got grants from the American Scandinavian Foundation and the Michigan Council on Arts and Cultural Affairs. And I even got an award from the Chamber of Commerce for a community project that I participated in 2013 and helped to develop. So you never know what will happen when you get students together with public humanities to do cool things together. How do I? Sorry, I'm trying to use the clicker. Oh, okay, there I am. Yes. So with this talk, I hope that you'll get a sense for how I incorporated research, community engagement, and student professional development to meet tenure application benchmarks for research, service, and teaching at this very small teaching institution I worked at. You can understand how combining these 3 sides of the tenure application plan into public-oriented work maximize productivity in all 3 areas. You can understand how students in the community can benefit from this kind of work. And I also want to tell you about some public humanities programs offered by the Humanities Center and how they can offer on-ramps for you and your students to do this kind of stuff too. So it should be exciting. I do have my disclaimers, of course. Every university is different, and every department within a university has different things going on as well. So you have different tenure and promotion guidelines, different resources of time, collaborators, pots of money, different types of classes that you're teaching that might have different avenues to the public humanities to consider. So all these factors mean basically that the public humanities in the classroom require you to choose your own adventure based on your unique circumstances. And these were just mine. As you can see, we had some overwhelming circumstances. I was like, wow, I taught 7 classes in 1 semester. I did. It was wacky. So how I learned to stop worrying and bring public humanities along for the ride. Again, Finlandia, it was very small. It was an under-resourced institution. And so, every university is an under-resourced institution. But there were times when we were worried that the lights would be shut off. And indeed, one time we did receive a shut-off notice from Upper Peninsula Power Co. Okay, so we were severely under-resourced. I had a weird role in this university because it was a university founded by Finnish immigrants, and I was a Finnish studies professor. And so I was kind of a show pony that they would take out sometimes to show potential donors things. Just do kind of performative work that demonstrated that Finnishness still mattered. And for me as a career, it did, it was an interesting part of my work back there. But this did give me more public visibility, and it also gave me resources that my colleagues didn't have. And so I would try sometimes to apply these resources to things that fit my colleagues, for instance, by cross-listing classes to help augment really small degree programs that might not be able to operate if you didn't have enough classes. I also would use financial resources to benefit students across the curriculum in different ways. We had a lack of concrete opportunities for students, which included things like internships. There were very few student organizations on campus. Our students were also very overworked, as were our instructors. So, we had student parents. We had a very high rate of student athletes at our school. A lot of our students were commuters, and most of our students were from the poverty or working class. So these were students who, like, every day it was, going to school and like doing the work and making it through was not just an easy thing. And so these things required creativity in augmenting student professional development. I also needed to make sure to be able to build support for my program, both internally and also throughout the community and throughout, kind of academic community, throughout funding communities, all sorts of things. So public humanities winds up being an obvious choice for me in this to get the word out about why should we care about Finnish studies, when we have all these other things going on. This wound up building rapport with the community and brought exposure, support, and money to my program, which was very useful and very helpful, of course. So I'm going to just breeze through a series of projects that I did throughout the course of my tenure career. So I'm going to drop in and just show some of the things that students and I wound up doing. And I'm going to talk about what it is that spurred these projects to be able to happen through the classroom work, and what kind of resources we needed to augment from the class. And then after I run through all these, I can show you common features that each one had, common questions you want to ask when you're thinking about doing public humanities work, and common ways to kind of approach problem solving in this. So first of all, I had this class called Finnish American Culture. It was primarily a history class. It also had aspects of kind of sociology and social science involved. And in the summer of 2017, I was approached by a couple different people about a couple of different things. One was a group of colleagues from Michigan Tech, which was the state school across the river in Houghton. They were working on this public humanities program that was going to take place over the course of 6 months concerning World War I and the armistice. And so they wanted to have this take place during 2018. They needed content, and they knew that I had a background with labor history, particularly with Finnish Americans and members of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, and a couple other local unions that had some interesting connections with World War I after our labor strike up there in 1913. They also knew that, I could probably contribute direct research to the projects they already had planned, or perhaps I could come up with something on my own. Well, the thing I came up with on my own was like, why don't I just do an exhibit about people who were against the war? Because it looks like you're talking about people who were all for the war. And so they're like, well, that sounds ambitious. Okay, good luck. And I was like, all right. So, I turned around and planned with my class. There was also, at the same time, a colleague of mine he is a sociologist at Northern Michigan University over in Marquette. And he's a filmmaker. He's been making films for many years, really good, really well acclaimed films. And he wanted to do one more film about this rural community called Palpi that he had been doing sociological research in for decades. But he didn't have funding, and he also needed some research support because he was retired at that point, and he was traveling back and forth with his wife to their snowbird home in North Carolina a lot. And so he just didn't have that direct access to the research resources that he used to. So I decided, well, I've got this class. Both of these projects concern Finnish American history. And we're on campus with one of the largest archives of Finnish American historical museum materials in the world. So what I did was I organized a class where after a bit in the class time in the semester, we started meeting once a week at the archives, and we would do archival research together. And at the end of the day, we were going through oral histories, we were going through photographs, we were going through newspapers, we were going through letters, we were going through the wide range of things to both find stuff about this community, Palki, and also about World War I. And so we would spend about 60 minutes of the class period doing this research. and then the last 20 minutes talking about what we did. So we tied it not just to the two projects we're working on each day, but also to the class itself. So I was sticking true to the curriculum. I was sticking true to the course objectives while allowing the students to do this kind of experiential way of making what we're learning about through books and lectures come to life in different ways, and also to support these two great projects. So we did wind up having an 11 panel exhibit, which not only showed at the World War I in the Copper Country Public Program, but since then has been displayed at a VFW hall in Negaunee, Michigan, and also at FinFest USA in Duluth, Minnesota, and also at the Carnegie Museum in Houghton. So this is something people have seen multiple times in the years since then for different audiences. And then this Pucky film, the funny thing was we wound up getting a grant from the American Scandinavian Foundation to support this film about Palki. Here is the DVD box. And what we learned was that there actually wasn't all that much information about the folk arts that we needed to document for the grant itself. And so we were able to do one historical film on the grant, but then we wound up having to do 5 other films about local folk arts and communities just adjacent to Palki. So it wound up being a much bigger project, but we wound up having this very, very rich body of material that had been there. The students got named credits in the Palki film because that work directly contributed to it. And then, we also have, this was shown on WNMU PBS. So some of these students, like they had family members or, bosses or whatever, who were like, I saw your name on TV. I had no idea you were a documentarian, and so these are things that I said, make sure you put this in your resume or your CV. Like this is something tangible that you did. And it was on PBS. So that's cool. One other thing that we did, another thing that I did with the class, I was teaching a literature class in the Kalevala, which is the Finnish national epic. And February 28th in Finland is a national holiday called Kalevala Day. Kalevala is actually responsible not just for the development of Finnish as a language that people use as the national language of Finland, which is a wild thing to tell you. They're also another wild story responsible for the independence of Finland as a nation. So odd, but true. I can tell you about that if you're ever bored. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to have a reading event where we would read a big chunk of the Kalevala and community members could just come out and help us. It's a really long poem. You'll see there's a flyer kind of down by Cooper. You can help us read this poem. I'll tell you more about it later, but it takes about 19 hours to read the whole thing from start to finish out loud, including some discussions and stuff that happen between poems. But what we did was we got the auditorium at the Finnish American Heritage Center, and we just invited people to come and join us that first year in 2019 to read from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon when I had to go pick up my kids from school. And we made it through like 21 poems. And community members came out and they were like, wow, this was so cool. Like, I'm Finnish. I have a copy of Kalevala on my bookshelf that my grandma owned. I've never read it because it's so intimidating. So this was really cool to get to come and just do this. Are you going to do this again? Well, I did it again. And it turned into a thing. During the pandemic, we actually had to move it online. And what happened when it moved online was that people started calling in from like Finland and like Canada and da-da-da. And at the same time during the pandemic, I started offering my Kalevala class to auditors completely online from around the world. So we got people, it was the United States and Canada who signed in, but you had people who were mostly retirees. These are mostly class members in this picture. That there was really cool. They modeled professional behavior for students. They modeled like that excitement about learning. Like there was all kinds of great stuff going on. But this turned into an annual event. And in the Kalevala class itself, the students and I planned and managed the event each year. So this was a chance for students to get professional development in event planning, which event planning in itself isn't a humanities thing, but it is actually something that people do work in when they leave school with a humanities degree. And so it's an important thing that students should get access to when they're in college. So that turned into a thing. You'll see, this is familiar to you because we do this here now at Wayne State. So what happened in the UP is something that's happening here now. And it doesn't have to just be Finnish people. And I'll tell more about that here in a little bit as well. I was teaching a class called Gender in Nordic Society. This was a cross-listed gender and sexuality studies and Finnish studies class. And there's this thing called gender mainstreaming, which basically has people use what's called a gender lens to look at everyday processes, physical locations, things like that to determine whether or not people of different gender identities have equitable access to the resources that you're supposed to have. So in the class, normally what I would do for the project is students would just navigate different everyday spaces and determine whether or not a gender lens was used to make that space happen. And when I was talking with the students as I was introducing the project, and they all started laughing about the athletic facilities on campus. And, again, we had a huge proportion of students, male and female, who were athletes. And so the students were talking particularly about this really, really beautiful facility that had been purchased on campus that had, a football field. It was supposed to have baseball fields after a while, which didn't happen. But it had a whole bunch of features already in place, and it had plans for other things to happen. But what the students were talking about was that the men's dressing facility had great resources, hot showers. It was all clean and nice. It was tiled, like the air was clean, like it was amazing. The girls' changing room was literally a trailer on the edge of the field that they referred to as the rat shack because of the rodents that were inside the building. Okay. There are very few rats in the UP. So the fact that the rats were all living in the girls' locker room, like, just infuriated me. And so I said, wait a minute, what's going on here? And they explained that, we have inequitable spaces. Girls' teams are scheduled for practice because, they have one field, but multiple teams. So the girls' teams will be scheduled at like not 3 in the morning, like 5 in the morning for practice and stuff like that. It was just all of it just seemed like the girls were taking on a much heavier burden of, inequity than the men. And so I said, well, should we change this project? And they said, absolutely. Okay, so what we did was during the course of the semester, we reallocated the project so that we would actually document the athletics facilities on campus. And we would compare them against both internal policy, Title IX, and NCAA rules to see what was going on. And we gathered together this evidence. And then what the plan was to be was that I would take this evidence and I would write up a report and then slip it to the Board of Trustees the following fall. The university closed in March. And so that didn't happen. But, the students were able to take something that obviously affected their daily lives and take what we're learning in the classroom and adjust it to their needs and their interests, which I was more than glad to do. And this actually does have some ethical concerns, right? Because retaliation against the students could certainly happen when this happens. And so that was something I was working on between the end of the semester and the time that I learned the university was closing, and that what all we had gathered was a moot point. We also did public humanities in study abroad. I'm just waving the clicker aimlessly. Okay, there we go. No. Okay, here we go. So I was in charge of a study abroad class that would go every May to Finland for about 3 weeks. This class was called the Digital Storytelling in Finland. And the basic point of the class was, we're going to do whatever it is that Finnish people want to do with us, as long as it is neither dangerous nor illegal, nor really, really distasteful based on the mood of the group. And we will write about what we saw. Now, this was an interesting class because when it was first developed, it was developed by a provost who kind of had a dream, but then that provost left, and the dream wasn't sustainable because it was expected that each student would do an independent research project across Finland where they would shadow like a professional. And it was just turning into like just way too much. And so I said, instead, what we'll do is we'll travel together and we'll experience things together each day. And you can be from any major in the university. And at the end of you have your own personal identity, you have your own interests, you have your own major that's dictating what it is that you see and understand. And then at the end of the day, we each write a blog about what we saw and did. And so you're getting kind of like, if you've ever seen Rashomon, the movie, it's kind of like that, different people telling a story of the same thing. So this is what we did. And it was cool because people could read it. It wasn't just these students, like parents or like other professors reading. There were people from all over the place who would read our blog and then get in touch with us and say, hey, that was interesting. Oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, I want to check out that museum. We went to museums. We've been to prisons. We've been to hospitals. We have been and had lunch with the mayor. Like, we have done all kinds of things in this class. And so it was really exciting to get to experience things and then to share it with a broader world. And it was cool because an individual class would have like one view of Finland, and then a second class the next year would have, sometimes they'd see the exact same thing and describe it in different ways. Sometimes we would see new stuff because new opportunities would open up. My students were there when Finland joined NATO, for instance, the day that Finland said, we're joining. We were there when it happened. And we were sitting there with people who were very kind of big movers and shakers in Finland and got to watch their response and talk about it with them. So all kinds of really cool stuff wound up happening through this. And it taught students that, there are these different ways that you can write meaningfully, academically, but also for a public audience that is interested in what it is that you have to say to share. I've also done public humanities through field schools. So I've gotten a chance to do really cool field schools. So there's first one was 2018. The University of Wisconsin-Madison had a grant from the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation to take some graduate and undergraduate students up to the UP and do a survey of traditional artists from the Finnish American community. There hadn't been a survey done of folks up there who do traditional arts, which includes like weaving, carving, singing, cooking, a wide range of things. And so I was actually the point person. So I connected them with I designed the whole program where we would go up and meet people. They would do interviews, they would do documentations. And it was all centered around this festival that happens in a town called Toivola, where I'm actually from. That's a midsummer festival. So I know you've probably seen that horror film, Midsummer. It's not like that. It's not that bad. But what we did was we actually went and documented the building of the bonfire the night before the event and helped actually. So there was a community service part where we built the bonfire with the community and documented it for them. And then the next day we went out and documented the festival itself. So, it was this really great opportunity to get to know what people were doing. And one of the things that came out of this was we actually created a short film for the community of Toivola showing the bonfire and it being built. They had never actually documented the building of their bonfire in the 130 years since they had started the festival. And so it was this great opportunity for them to get to watch themselves at work and to notice like quirky things, to just see it all come together. And it's a document now that they share pretty consistently with the community. They have a Facebook page where, every so often you see it get shared. Hey, did you see this cool thing that Hillary did? So, and I'm from there, so they have nicknames for me, and Bean Baby being one of them. In 2022, I did a second field school with Michigan Technological University. They have an industrial archaeology program that's really, really incredible. And they asked me, as somebody who knows about cultural landscapes of Finnish Americans and also about oral history methods, if I could be one of the instructors for it. So I helped to connect them with a local farmstead in my community that had not been documented by vernacular architecture specialists. This was being done in advance of the 2024 Vernacular Architecture Forum conference that took place in Houghton. And this conference is really cool. Like, I don't know if anybody's here has ever been to VAF, but if you haven't, you should go sometime, because one of the key cornerstones of the work that they do is the first 2 days of the conference are actually tours of local vernacular architecture, landscapes, buildings, and so forth. And they're thematized on certain things. And so we developed a tour for which we did this field work that was based on both these rural farmsteads that Finnish Americans, they have a very kind of particular hallmark of how they do farmsteads. So we had the farmsteads, then we went to an Ojibwe traditional ground in the Keweenaw Indian community in nearby Baraga, where we looked at a landscape that was it had been getting mine tailings coming down the lake and planted, kind of settling there on this beach. That was very important. It was right next to the powwow grounds. There were all these other important spaces right there. And so it was showing how do you remediate the landscape and make it so that it's a place that people can use again on the tribe's terms. And then we went into the community of Hancock and we visited a local synagogue that's been there for over 100 years, as well as the neighborhood behind it. And then we wound up actually at my university had just closed the year before, but the Heritage Center was still open, so we had dinner there. So they got a chance to see all these spaces. With this field school, they needed to document these buildings in advance of it to create a guidebook, which is actually down there too. So, you can take a look at the guidebook and see what we did, but the idea is that not only is the guidebook useful for that event, because VAFers, I've learned, they don't like to hear about it. They like to take their guidebooks and meander and wander through the buildings and spaces and be like, oh, right, it says right here. There's they always have these don't miss. And I'm mine are don't miss the composting toilet. Don't miss that empty bottle of whiskey under the staircase. It was kind of fun to get to tell stuff like that. So that's what we did for that. This was funded in part by the, both by student tuition for the students who came in, but also by the Vernacular Architecture Forum. So, it was a way again to have an actual classroom experience that had this output, taught students. I mean, they were drawing architectural renderings. We all had these gigantic tape measurers, and it was great fun. And then the last one that I'll show is an extracurricular public humanities work. So in Wisconsin, in Eau Claire, there's this community, it's called Nordenfolk. It's just a little Scandinavian American community club. And they started hosting years and years ago, I want to say about 1970, this annual gathering between their organization, as well as all the Midwestern Nordic Studies departments. at this outdoor, it's kind of like a summer camp, but we would always meet in February. And for this course of a weekend, yeah, for the course of this weekend, what we would do is, thankfully there were heated rooms, so we weren't, freezing. But over the course of this weekend, we would all get together and it would be a mashup of both what you would think of as a traditional conference. There would be lectures, there would be some films, but then there would be these other things. There was a lot of like folk craft building. They actually would have Nordic sports. I feel bad. I should have done a picture of the axe throwing that we would always do, but instead my son won first place one year in the kick sled. So of course I have to show my baby. He's not watching this. But you do all these things together, and this was both for the academics, the students, and the community members. So it brought people together. The community members were teaching us how to do things like weave, carve, and dance. And we were telling them about the nerdy things we were doing in the classroom. So it was this really great exchange. The students were in charge of helping to plan it and to make it happen. And so each year, a different academic department would take on the role of, we'll gather up the people who are doing the talks, we'll gather up the AV equipment, we'll make the whole thing work. And so the students worked right alongside me, making sure that I had all the speakers and microphones and making sure that, oh gosh, we need someone from 2:30 to 4:45 to talk. What are we going to have them do? And sometimes the students themselves would actually fill in the spots. So I had multiple students, two actually, who gave talks at this event about a wide variety of really cool things. So it was another chance for students to professionally share out their own kind of research and work. So how do we make this work? The first thing you want to do is you want to find partners that can benefit from an imposition. We know that it's difficult sometimes to take students into a workspace that they might not have done before and say, hey, we're going to document a building, or we're going to go into an archive in a language that you don't even speak and make you look up stuff that in a language you don't speak. Let me repeat that. And go onto people's private property, do all these different things. So you have to find folks that need your help to begin with, and that can work with what you have to offer. So in my first case with the films with Michael, I have an under-resourced filmmaker who's part of the year in North Carolina. I have a wood carver who needed an apprentice. He needed apprentices. So I was working with Pete Olson, and he was one of the guys we wound up having in our films. I also had students who were going through the archives and seeing if they could find anything about traditional arts in Tapiola. They also looked up resources from an online Finnish database just for historic kind of stock footage of these traditional arts being practiced in Finland. And we got 2 grants. We got one grant from the American Scandinavian Foundation for the films. We got the other grant from the state of Michigan for the exhibit. And so we wound up having 2 exhibits, some Upper Peninsula PBS films, and a whole bunch of other cool stuff on. I totally forgot to mention, I was talking about the exhibit that we did. My students and I, we did the research for it. I worked with my colleague in the art and design school, and he actually had a project class where they designed the physical panels. So it was cool because the students in that class got to take a study of historic aesthetics from 1910s. And so they're actually using color palettes that were in vogue back then, and different kind of things. So they got their own chance to learn. And then a student they had to compete and see which student had the winning design. So that student in the art school also got a credit for working with the design. And then my colleague and I did the finish up work to make it, a finalized exhibit. But, with the Vernacular Architecture Forum, they wanted to have this conference. There were these historic properties that needed to be documented. There were also curious land stewards who wanted to know not just about the history of the property as it stood, but also the indigenous history before that and the geological history before that. And we provided all of that information. We've got the curious students, which led to a field school, which led to oral histories, photographs, drawings, and guidebooks. You want to use principles of equity when assigning student tasks as well. So, when you're doing this kind of work, you want to make sure that you're already working with student interests, needs, abilities, and so forth. And you can assign these different tasks based on things like reading. So if you have students who are more into the deep reading or the speed reading, photo analysis, if you have students who can look at a photo and tell that they're looking at something from the 1930s versus the 1910s or whatever. Listening, sometimes students could just listen to an oral history while they were, like, especially with my student athletes, they like to be able to listen to the oral histories while they were on their bus, for instance, traveling. List compilation, if students like to be able to make lists and say, yeah, these are things we should look at, these are things we know don't work, and so forth. And digitization. So I had students who could do all these things. And you're working with students who might have like learning disabilities, who might have, I had a student who actually was recovering from cancer in this class. So I had her work from home. And, you just take your team, find out the ways that you can best harness what they're doing, and then have them do it. And sometimes you're gonna have to do the fill-in work for that, but that, is what's gonna make it happen, is being willing to work together and realize that sometimes you do have to step in and do it. And that's fine. And this ties into it. The instructor's contributions have to be equitable as well. So where is it gonna make sense for you to do the heavy lifting? Obviously, the curation part and the final design part of this exhibit, that was me and my colleague Tom. We had the basic design from the art and design student, and we had the information from the students in my class, and we were able to create this exhibit. This athletic complex, it took a lot for the students to be able to go through the NCAA regulations. Again, this was going to be a much smaller project when I first designed the class, but when I realized that we could actually suit it to a student need, I adjusted it without trying to you can't overfill their schedule because we still had other things planned in the class. So having them do the direct research, which was also kind of dangerous, right? Like if their coach was going to notice them taking pictures in the locker room or whatever, they might say something. So, we had to do this in a way that made sense, that made it where like students who are already going to be in those spaces could be in those spaces. The students who weren't athletes, they could read the NCAA docs, for instance, or they could, document the exterior areas that other people were using. And two, I wanted to protect the students from any repercussions that could come down from the university itself for saying, hey, you guys, you're oppressing our students, you're violating rules. Here's what you need to do about it. And again, that part wound up not being an issue because the university closed down and there was nobody to tell this to anymore. But it was something that I was working on and thinking about, and I already knew who I was going to leak it to. He's not in the Zoom, but he knows who he is if he ever sees this. This work has to be visible for student resumes and CVs. So if you're going to have students do work like this, they have to be able to put this at the end of the day somewhere in that CV. And, for a lot of students, like, especially if you're an undergrad, you might not even think about this. And so I had to repeatedly tell students, first of all, when we have the opening reception for this thing, you're one of the creators. So if you want to come, you absolutely should, and you should invite your friends. Second, this is where I would put it in my resume at your age if I were you. And people saw it on the PBS, they saw my students' names. When I wrote an article based on the research that we had done about World War I, I also thanked them for the work that they did. They were credited in the exhibit. And then, students also could take the information. I'm writing stuff, writing papers, writing exhibits or whatever. My students were also free to do the same thing. So I had a student who the whole time he was digitizing papers, he kept noticing kids were doing work on behalf of World War I. And he was like, that's weird. And so he wound up writing a paper about it, which he was the only undergraduate accepted to that symposium. And he talked, and it was an erudite paper. It was fantastic. So make sure you put that on your CV. So, people do this really great stuff. Both the activities and the outputs need to benefit partners. Hit the play button. So, when we imposed ourselves upon the community. Yeah, okay. So when we asked the community of Toivola if we could go and document the process of building the pyre, the first thing they told me was like, and these are folks I've known my whole life, right? Like they've known me, they've seen me in diapers. And they were like, well, Hillary, we don't know if we'll be able to make it this year. Like Carl is sick and so-and-so had to go out to California and da-da-da. So we're looking for volunteers. And I said, well, I've like this field school, like there's going to be like 10, 12 of us. We could just show up with work gloves and do it. So that sealed it, obviously, if you can do something that can actually make something happen, do it. So we are there, a lot of these people are people from the field school. And so the guys would come down with this, they store lumber, like people just take lumber they have lying around for the whole year and store it in this guy's field. And then they just get truckload after truckload and we bring it down to the beach. And so we did have a couple of students who set up the camera, and there was one student who couldn't do that work, but he was able to go and observe it from different, perspectives and take photographs and to man the camera and make sure it didn't get knocked over or anything like that. So we made it happen, and then we get this film out of it, which again is something that's a durable product both for them. They wanted it. They actually asked if they could also have it in the regular slower motion so they could watch it in real time. So, they got both copies that they can use. And our students, again, they've got a film credit. They've got something they can show for this. And it's a process that we can actually use as folklorists. We can use this in our own post fieldwork research outputs. It's gonna lag and then it's gonna speed up, isn't it? Okay, and then again, the fruits of this labor should be put to use in other ways too. So, students, like I had one student, Abby, who taking the Kalevala class and being involved in the reads and going to Finland with me, got involved in like making Kalevala inspired art. One of these works was actually published in an undergraduate research journal. She also was commissioned by the librarian at our university to do a series of a triptych of different scenes from Kalevala. My student Seth Dahl, again, he presented on children in World War I and what they were doing to support the war effort. Gina Jalici, one of my students, led a intellectual and interpretive exploration of the mysterious Sampo device in Finnish mythology at the Wallstrom workshop. So she read from Kalevala about what it was, and she's like, all right, you guys, we're all going to draw a picture. So everybody made a piece of art about what this thing was and what we thought it was in our heads. And then my student Seth Dahl also presented at the Wallstrom on the development of color words in Finnish and Scandinavian languages. Crayola actually has a gigantic impact on what we think colors are. I'll just say that. Pre-Crayola, there wasn't even a word for some of these colors in the Scandinavian languages. Like colors like green. It took a long time for the word green, for instance, to come out, I want to say in Finnish. So, it's interesting stuff these students are able to do beyond just what we do. A tally, during my time at Finlandia, I have this color coded. So if it's white, it's something that went on my CV. If it's blue, it went on a student's CV. If it was red, both of us could claim credit for it. We did one national traveling exhibition consultancy. This exhibit is now visible in the state of Minnesota at Minneapolis at the American Scandinavian Institute, if you're interested. I have one piece of art in it, which, sorry, Pekka, I didn't mean to tell anyone. We had one regional traveling exhibition, 2 small in-house exhibits, 6 full-length films, an hour long, and 1 short film. All the full lengths were broadcast on WNMU PBS, 3 publications, 5 Kalevalathons, 5 student art commissions or publications that I know of, 3 student conference presentations, 1 student public lecture, 7 years of digital humanities publication, 3 vernacular architecture guidebooks, 1 stage production public programs guidebook, an archival collection documenting approximately 12 traditional artists and 1 community festival, archival collection documenting 2 historic farmsteads, 7 Wallstrom Nordic workshops, 1 nationally competitive student internship, 1 nationally competitive student apprenticeship in knife making, and 1 wood carving apprenticeship that I took on myself in order to help with the national touring exhibit that's going on right now. So does that sound like fun to you? You want to go public? Let's see how we can do this. So here at Wayne State, we have several avenues. One is the Big Epic Read. So this is a free and public reading of a work of world literature, which is held in a local venue and over Zoom. The local venue itself has to be a cultural organization that's tied to that work that we're reading. So this year we have 2 events. One is the Finnish Epic Kalevala with the Finnish Cultural Center on Saturday, February 28th. I have a flyer down by Port Cooper is going to be like the Stewart and stuff, but grab a flyer and sign up if you'd like to come. We also soon will be having a flyer for this as well. A reading of the British Paradise Lost epic with Jamie. And that's going to be with the Commonwealth Club on April 25th. This also is going to have a pre-event reading group, which will start in March, and performances of Paradise Lost here on campus with CFPCA I want to say it's April 17th to the 26th. Okay, so this is crossover work that we're doing that's bringing the humanities to the community. But not only are we bringing it to the community, in this instance, we're also highlighting these cultural organizations that do the work in Detroit of fostering community among, and you can do this both among ethnic groups, like I'm working with the Finns, she's working with the Commonwealth Club, which is British, but this can be through occupational groups or, all kinds of different communities have a work of literature that represents their interests and that, they would like to read out loud together in a group. So, this is something that can be done and adapted to classroom-based public humanities. So if this is something you want to do, come talk to me. We can do this. We also have tours and exhibits. So this year we have had, well, last year actually now, we had a tour of Belle Isle with Cooper as the tour guide, so we got a grant from the Being Human Festival, which is a national festival that has events all over the country in the same kind of time range. And so for ours, we paired up Cooper, who is an expert in public park history, and particularly, he has this expertise in Detroit park history as well as Belle Isle. We paired him up with Ossie White, who is an educator with the Belle Isle Conservancy at the aquarium. And we also worked with the Church of the Messiah in the Island View neighborhood. And actually, John was on this tour too. We got on the bus for a half a day and we visited different sites. And Cooper, Ossie, and then some docents from Belle Isle told different stories about it, which also allowed community members to make their own memories, to make their own observations, to, talk about their own experiences on Belle Isle. We also ate a really good lunch. But it was a way to get together and have this community storytelling event that brought together a variety of voices and a variety of perspectives on the same spaces that we're all experiencing. We also had the opportunity with the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which was built in Detroit, was headed to Detroit the night that it sunk, to collaborate with the Mariners Church and the Dawson Great Lakes Museum to create an exhibit that would augment the programming that they were doing for this event. And so we curated a very nice six panel exhibit that during the weekend of the commemoration events, I just brought back and forth between the two places. So, it was like this speedy delivery of an exhibit and put it up, and then, okay, that concert's over, here comes the book talk, let's put it up there. So this is something that can also be done. I've already demonstrated that you can work with a class to create an exhibit. And yeah, I know that actually there are classes here that have done exhibits because I've seen them on Belle Isle. So this is something that we have done and that you can easily do, and that I'm here to help if you want. We're also developing something called the Detroit Music Atlas. So this came out of a NEH Digital Humanities or Deep Mapping Institute that was established in 2025, but advertised in 2024. We didn't get in, but I don't blame myself since I had started working there 2 weeks before, the deadline, I think. But actually, I have great news. I have a great update, Jamie, that you're gonna love after this.
You're gonna love it.
Yes. But basically what we want to do is we want to have this website where people can do different aspects of mapping, online archiving, and kind of crowdsourcing to tell the story of Detroit music in a variety of different ways, both, past, present, coming into the future. And so this is actually an opportunity from the ground up for people here at Wayne State to collaborate on something that can be used both as a big, broad website. It can also be used as an app for people who come to tour our city. There are all kinds of opportunities here. And it's a way for people who have existing research to contribute to it. It's also a way for people to, you've got a class who's like a Detroit Studies class, have them go tour an area and document it, and we can put it in, or, there's all kinds of different things that we can do. But this is an on-ramp that actually has a lot of room for flexibility based on the needs, interests, and resources of the classes and the researchers in question. Finally, we have the Humanities Action Day, which we had our very first one in November. Now, this was a big event that brought community and campus together in a celebration and exploration of what makes us human and why does it matter and what can we do to keep our dialogues going when we know that sometimes people don't want to hear what we have to say, right? And so for the Humanities Action Day, this is a way for people to be able to help again with event planning and implementation, which is a very, very important skill for students in college to be able to leave, because it does help you to get jobs. And it connects you with some really important and really cool people and things that are going on. Public humanities sometimes can seem like something that is an extra in what we're doing in the classroom. It can seem like it's kind of a burden that you're putting on top of yourself to get things done. But I hope that I've demonstrated that, A, that's not the case. You can dovetail your work. You can do this to model professional work for students and to show them what they could be doing in the future in the field. But the other part is that, we're in this time in the United States where, we see that people think that the humanities and the art don't matter. You know, we probably know somebody who has a Facebook, like their Facebook picture right now is an AI of themselves. An artist they could do that. I could draw a picture of myself for my Facebook profile, right? We have legislators who, for decades now, right, make fun of what we do in the classroom. Us sitting here in the ivory tower and acting like the public doesn't need to be engaged in what we do and that we don't need to remind the public that what we do is important and actually directly relates to them is us sitting in here at our peril. It's not that hard to reach out. It can be intimidating. Talking to folks you don't know at first is always intimidating, but you know, you do have people who can help with that, and we're more than happy to do that. So I'll go ahead and cut it because I know I've got to leave some time for questions. But if any of you want to collaborate with us at the Humanities Center, we help with project development. We help try to find funds for things. We help to implement programs, and we have programs that you can already go ahead and do with us if you want to just get out there and do it. So thank you all for listening, and I'll open it up for questions.
And I should just say that nobody should be shy to contact Victoria because this is her job. So
Precisely, it's not a bother.
why she's here.
I'm so busy, yeah.
So now we have some time for questions.
I have a question.
I answer.
First an observation, which is that this particular chair nearly killed me. And
Okay,
should probably be retired.
all right, we'll retire it.
We'll set it
If
on
you sit on
fire.
the left side, it feels very secure, but if you happen to lean right, you're just gonna go.
You're not in the chair, are you? Is it over there
Yeah.
next to you? Okay.
You switched chair, okay.
I'm still in the dangerous chair.
We will
But I'm
have,
just-
we're going to have a fire burning ceremony after this, so please join us down in the
All right,
green.
perfect. Perfect.
It might not be the only one Coopers.
I,
So let's all test right now.
I know these chairs are old. Okay, the question though, so I've thought about doing some of these things in my own classes. Like some of my favorite undergraduate classes were along these lines. Like I had this amazing class on historic preservation where most of our class sessions were held at historic Fort Wayne, you know, and we like did projects with them, etc. Now that I'm in the role of professor, I've got kind of two hangups about doing more stuff like that, although I do a little bit of it in my classes. One is sheer like time management on my end.
Yes.
The other is assessment. Like, I'm curious about some of these experiences that you described, where like you're kind of like celebrating that like your students are doing like really different stuff. Like they're not all doing the same project exactly. They're not all having the same experience, which is great from like an enrichment perspective. But then for you as a professor, how are you assigning grades, or what kinds of like reflections or projects, or like what are you doing to decide at the end of the semester who did what, you know?
Gets an A, right, yeah, yeah, so, when I did the museum project where we would go to the archives every week, that was basically in lieu of me giving a lecture. And so in that regard, it was still, the onus was still on me to make sure that things were being done. And so, and because students were doing various things, right? Like I had one student who was at home during that time, you know, doing her part of the research and then submitting what she had learned at the end of each day. So students did have this thing where they had to account for what they've been doing, but I was also there the whole time, you know, to kind of walk with them and say, hey, what are we looking at right now? Like what, you know, and so it was very active. And of course, it did take out class time from doing the lecture, which is why it was important then to retie it to the reading and the more intensive lecture I'd had earlier in the week. So yeah, assessing the grades itself, that was very much more like just them participating and contributing what was expected of them. And I was lucky in that I had very small class sizes at Finlandia for the most part. And so all of these classes were ones that I was able, if I saw somebody looked like they were, you know, updating their, you know, social media or whatever, I'd go over and be like, so what's this oral history? Like, have we noticed whether or not this guy kept wood carving in the 1830s or 1930s or whatever? So I don't know if that kind of answers it. It was very much me kind of prodding and sticking around and then kind of asking active questions while they were working to make sure that things were still going on.
Did you, I mean, just to follow up on Cooper's question, did you have rubrics or some kind of standardized way to evaluate the final project, you know, or final contribution of each student?
Right, so that part also was a little difficult. They did have writings, it's true. They did have once a week, they did have to do a write-up about what they were learning. And so, I mean, yeah, you couldn't be like, I digitized 800 articles compared to like, I read 3 oral histories or whatever the thing was. But what I asked them to do was make it to show that what they were learning through the archives was relating to what we were learning through the written assignments that they did each week. So they did have like a writing journal. Yeah, I should have mentioned that.
I see we have 2 questions online. So let's go to Beth Fowler's question first. How do you find these types of partners who need your help, especially if you were trying to get students to work with communities which you yourself are not a part of?
Yeah, so that's when you have to kind of work with other people. You have to snowball it a little bit and talk to colleagues. And that's one thing that we do hope to be able to offer through the Humanities Center and the Hub is matchmaking with, different community partners. Sometimes it's just me doing some Googling around and figuring it out or talking to people that I already know. And, I mean, this shouldn't like, what we don't want is we don't want to add to your burden. Cause I mean, I showed you that first slide where I was showing you like the workload and all the committees I was on and all that kind of stuff. You all have those too. And so this is where we do hope to be able to help come in. And, you do also have, most people do already have a little bit of, a community that they can draw from. But I guess basically what I would say is just, we help to kind of build those connections when they happen. We help to see if ideas that we have for matchmaking make sense. And we ask people that we know, I mean, Wayne State is a situated campus. This school has been here since 1868, and even though not all of us have been, everybody who works here has a network of something that they can contribute to it. So
I would add too that Christine Jackson has just hired, someone to basically do service learning for the university.
yes,
Finally,
Yep.
there will be one person who can help with that. And so, you could, reach out to her or to DEED with I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but
Right.
that's basically the open door for community, the community to come to us and us to go to the community.
yeah,
So there are some resources beyond the university, beyond Humanities Center.
yeah, it's
We're
true. And actually,
university-wide.
we'll have that meeting tomorrow with WSU Open to learn more about.
Right,
Yeah, so there
yeah.
are a couple of late breaking offices that aren't just us that can also help with that. So, there are multiple campus entities that are here to help support community connection, which can then help you to do public humanities work in the classroom.
And we connect with them, so then we can always refer you.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Thank
Make
you
it
for being more
seamless.
specific.
Yeah. Let's see, and Yunchuang has a question as well, and then we'll see if there are more questions in the room. During these amazing programs and activities, did you encounter any inappropriate or disrespectful attitudes toward public humanities or regional cultures? I hope not, but if so, how did you respond?
Okay, so I worked previously in the Upper Peninsula, which is a very socially conservative area, right? It's a place that votes for Trump every time his name shows up on the ballot. And so, they're voting for a ticket that takes away money from the public humanities, and that demeans the work that we do every day. However, what you find is that, national discourse that demeans people based on these kind of like political binaries ignores the fact that local interactions happen every day. And so even though somebody might be going to the ballot box and voting in a way that ends up taking away funding from the programs that we're doing to support them, we're very interested and very happy to have our interest in their programs. And so, I mean, I know people who have people who might see it in this kind of abstract way because of what they're reading about universities and the way that they spend money and stuff like that. When you go out to the town and you go out to their home and say, hey, we want to document your farmstead, could we do that? That it personalizes it, and it shows that, we are actually here to care. And this is actually part of the reason why public humanities is so important, is because it does counter these narratives that are meant to kind of separate and divide us. Actually doing this work is actually a way to kind of bring the heat down from the way things are going on right now. So, people usually were not inappropriate or disrespectful when we would come out. What they were typically was kind of like, what is that? And why do you care about my dad's old crumbling barn? And then when they found out that we cared for the same reasons that they cared about it, that actually made a huge difference and opened up doors. I mean, we actually stayed in the field in the place that we documented in Toivola for a whole week. There was like no running water. There was like, but we were allowed to stay there. And they were like, yeah, you could bring an outhouse. That's fine. Or one of those porta potties, I mean, so yeah, they were a lot more welcoming than you would expect. I mean, sometimes people would be a little suspicious, and sometimes there's people who don't want you on their property or doing certain things, but they'll let you know, and then you just go away. As for regional cultures, I would say that, the people who are coming to the events that are looking at regional cultures and looking at, I mean, this can be regional, it can be minority, it can be a broad variety of cultures that aren't typically, upheld, right, in the arts and the humanities. The people who are showing up at these events and activities, they care and they're happy to get to see folks getting a stage and getting, recognition from us. So I didn't, a lot of times people who have those attitudes are actually, sometimes other academics who come from more elitist backgrounds, quite frankly, but it wasn't really a problem with people who are engaging with programs that we did.
I see Walter has a question in the chat, but I want to toggle back to us for a minute and see if there's a question in the room. Yeah, Christine.
I just have some questions about practicality of this. So first off, how many students would you recommend for these type of experiential kind of projects? That would be the first kind of question.
It completely depends, right? And it also depends on the, like the level of the student. So some of the public humanities work that I did that I didn't really highlight here was with a, first year experience class. That class, there was a total, it was like our entire freshman body, which at Finlandia was only like 100 students at a time, but it was broken down to about 15 to 20 students per section, which is a huge class for Finlandia. So, you're in charge of 20 students. Sometimes we would take these students out on walking tours in the community and like, learn as we walked and then have them contribute their own stories about the places. Sometimes we would take the entire class up to this mine tour to, go to an old mine and go underground and stuff. So it's going to depend on the level that you have. But I mean, you could imagine, for instance, I always give this as an example of how maybe the Detroit Music Atlas could work. If you have a group of first year students, say you got like 20 students in a class or something, you could all go out and document, for instance, local music venues, like the exteriors of the building, and just like take their pictures. And each student could take the picture and then maybe you can say, we're going to see like which student got the better angle and maybe use that for the atlas. Right. So it's something simple, but you can see that you could actually have a rather large group of students do it. You can also break the students up into groups if you have a larger class than that. So it just depends on what you want. Like if you were ever thinking of a humanities project and like had more concrete stuff in mind, I would be happy to sit down with you and say, well, here's what I would do.
I just think from for it to be manageable.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And again, that's really going to depend on the nature of the project. Most of my classes, our field schools typically would be less than 10 students. And so again, sometimes these are going to be small things, but they are things that you can also do in shifts or break it up a little bit.
This is not my show, but I'll just jump in and say, I have done public humanities work with classes of 24 and you just make a big project, break them into groups, they take parts of the project and it works really well.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to chat with you about it as well.
Yeah.
And then some other follow-up logistic questions. So how do you get students to local community events and workshops? I mean, I don't know that I even have thought about.
Yes. So for that, again, at Finlandia, I was lucky that my students had gigantic burdens. And so I had to think about this all the time. How am I not going to actually make a burden on them? A lot of times you're not necessarily going to be able to have them go to like a workshop that's scheduled at a given time. With the Kalevala read, what I did was I actually scheduled it on a day that we had class. And then the students could either come during our regular class time, or they could come at a time that worked for them. And they were expected to come for the amount of time that it took to be at class and to serve, to help as a host and to help like with logistical stuff during that time. So you can't always expect students to do like off-campus stuff. You can't always expect students to like do off-schedule stuff. But if you plan the humanities program so that it's flexible enough to meet a variety of needs, then, and I mean, actually when the Big Epic Read, or well, now it's Big Epic Read, when the Kalevalathon during the pandemic, students would call in and they would actually have them be a co-host and just kind of manage the Zoom, for instance. And so even things like that actually helped me so I could continue to focus on the hosting duties. So yeah, it just, sometimes you have to work with a very, very concrete thing, but you still could take that and make that the center point from which you build out.
And for transportation, like.
Right, yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, well, that it happened on campus, right? And so, I mean, in that instance, now with a field school, obviously that's planned in, like the students know that that's going to have to happen. But yeah, when I mean, you can do a lot of stuff just from right around here. Maybe sometimes it could be a walk, maybe sometimes say, instead of meeting in our classroom here, we're going to meet at like, through the library or whatever. But yeah, I mean, there are things that you can definitely do just from right here on campus.
And then my last question, sorry.
Yeah.
Is there a standard waiver for these kind of like fields, I imagine we have something similar in place for anthropology or other kind of disciplines, but I wonder if there's something that Wayne State has for, I'm thinking like I lead a faculty-led study abroad, and students have to sign a pretty comprehensive waiver through the study abroad office. I'm just wondering if something was to ever happen, who that.
Right,
liability would
yes.
fall. And
Yeah, so that's a good question too. And actually, I don't know, maybe Cooper or one of you guys, because I should say, I'm not a faculty member here. So.
This is the thing that the OTL has a service learning group, and over the years, many a time we have wondered about this exact same thing and not known, and there was no one to go ask. Who are you gonna go? I mean, OGC, I guess, right? Go to general counsel. We never did. So I think that's the benefit of Christine Jackson's office having a service learning person, that these
Yeah.
mysteries will be cleared up.
Mhm.
For example, can I drive students somewhere?
Mhm.
Because I did have students go out to Troy or Bloomfield Hills or whatever and do service learning stuff, and they carpool. But was that okay? I don't know. It just happened. So I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like with the internships that we had last summer, that was an instance where students were going off campus. But yeah, there wasn't like a waiver situation. But yeah, the Office of General Counsel, when we had our tour with Cooper, we had to have people sign waivers when they got on the bus. So, there is an infrastructure for that, and they are very good. Like they did a great job with us. So.
We're gonna have to figure out a lot of these things for the Francophone Detroit class. So if they're good questions, we're just gonna have to attack them one by one, and
Yeah, it sounds like
we'll
we
share
should-
the results with everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds good.
But that's part of the, the benefit too, to having Victoria here, is that she can serve as a clearinghouse just,
Yeah.
for specific humanities related questions that, we may have, and people are doing service learning in the med school and all other kinds of places, but it's nice to have someone who can be an expert in that for the humanities.
Yeah.
Now, I know we're supposed to end on time, but Walter had a question in the chat. I want to make sure we get a chance to hear Walter's question. Walter says, what a wonderful addition to the work of the Humanities Center. Thank you, Walter. Is there an opportunity for faculty outside the advisory board to suggest projects?
Absolutely. Oh, yes, yes, yes. We seek advice from anybody. So I've always had this philosophy, which I had said when I did the study abroad, is that if the Finns want to do it and we're allowed to, and it's not dangerous or horrifying, we'll just do it. So that is my ongoing philosophy, I would say, with the Humanities Center too. If Jamie says we can do it, yes. If there's some way we can figure out that we can do it, get the money, get the resources and so forth, why not just let it happen? Yeah. So people should definitely feel free to reach out and, ask about stuff and say, hey, is this possible? We should just make it possible if it's not horrifying or illegal.
We will do our best. Yes. Well, thank you so much. I mean, feel free to stick around and ask Victoria additional questions, or if you're online, to send her an email. Again, it is her job to do this kind of work, and she's more than happy to chat about it. So thank you, Victoria, and thank you all for being here.